Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Orange Team Podcast. Today, we're going to discuss an interesting trend we've noticed of people craving authenticity in the media they consume today. We're also going to discuss why first drafts of projects are vital. And finally, we talk about video game adaptations, what makes them good and what makes them fail. Let's dive right in. Hey everybody, welcome to the Orange Team Podcast. I'm Leighton, he's Mitch, and we're glad to have you listening to us today or watching. Mitch, how are you doing?
Doing real good, Leighton. It's been interesting, as you can see behind me. I am not where I was last season, and so that means that things are still in flux. So there may be another steady progression over the episodes of things moving around, maybe the salmon-colored paint on the walls changing. Who knows? It'll be interesting to see. Maybe, for all I know, it'll look exactly like this for the entire season.
That's okay.
Yeah, that's okay, because sometimes that's the way life is, right?
That's exactly it. Life happens at the pace it happens at, so don't feel pressured. I know as a homeowner that I had many lofty goals when I first purchased my house. And life had a way of humbling me and telling me, no, you will wait. And, you know, you might say, oh, that means that I didn't do, I don't know, got lazy or something. It's like, no, it's just, that's reality. You've got to not hold that against yourself. So it'll happen when it happens. And I'm excited. It'll be fun to see the progression of where you are at. Throughout these episodes. And if no one's watching them, at least we get to chronicle them for ourselves. But we hope that we have some people following us, watching us, and we've got a fun show for you today. But before we get into our topics, let's discuss a little bit about some things we've been enjoying lately.
The feedback I've gotten indicates that this is a much enjoyed segment, and I think it's literally just what you and I would be doing anyways. That's why we started the podcast. And so it's like, yeah, of course we're going to start and just be like, hey, here's what I've been doing, playing, watching, etc. So for me, of late, it has been a while, although I think that there will be an episode before this. Am I right? This is not episode 1. Okay.
So for those who don't know, so we've already recorded an episode. And I haven't even edited it yet, but it is going to come out. And for those who are watching this one, will have probably already listened or watched that one, and will notice that it is a little different than this one. You probably have already seen it and know that we got to hang out together in an undisclosed place, but we got to see each other in person. But we had some
undisclosed location.
Yeah, but we had some technical difficulties. Thankfully, we were still able to record the audio. And so what you saw was just the audio with an image. That was not on purpose, for those who are wondering. But, we had a great time recording that one. We didn't want it to go to waste. So it is live, and you can go back and watch it. But yeah, at this present time, I have not made it. So I'm saying this as if it's already out. But
I like how you were trying to avoid spoiling anybody.
Yeah, I was trying to avoid spoiling, but this episode's going to come out a week after that one. So, yeah, it's weird. So I don't think people really understand that. When you make a podcast, it's not like we record this and then put it out the next day. It takes time to edit these. It takes time to, we edit and we go back and forth. And we get other people's opinions to make sure that, everything worked properly. And also for us, we have lives that are going on. So we like to have a little bit of a buffer. So if we talk about things that maybe it seems like we're behind topically, well, that's why. Just a little peek behind the curtain. I think most podcasts do this. Only very few can get things out in a time to really match what the current culture is going through. But that's not the point of this podcast. We're just chatting. And yes, in the previous podcast, we talked about a few things, but I think, I don't know. I don't know. Is there anything changed since then, Mitch, as far as things you've been enjoying?
On the topic of things maybe not being quite bleeding edge, I've been getting back into Fallout, all thanks to the TV show. So it started with watching like the first episode of the show. You and I did while you were here. And then I kept watching it. And my wife was interested. And so she started watching it with me. And it makes sense, her being interested in kind of that Art Deco, mid-century modern style. That's kind of her jam. I didn't expect her, and the more intense moments of the show and of the game, which I'll get to, do cause her to kind of hide under the blankets and, run into the other room for a second. But nonetheless, she's enjoying it, and that surprised me. And so because she enjoyed the show, I went and Xbox Game Pass was doing a sale on the entire Fallout series, of course, because of the show. And so I just went and rebought everything. So it's on my Xbox account now, in addition to my Steam and everywhere else. And so we started playing through Fallout 3. And a couple of nights last week, I'd jump in and play for a couple hours. And so we're out of the vault now, and we've been to Megaton, and now we're going around and helping kids with their giant ant problem. And it's been fun, and she really enjoys, the world building of the lore and getting to see kind of how that game became that show. And I'm really looking forward to grinding it out and doing a little New Vegas, maybe a little Fallout 4 after, maybe Fallout 76. That might be a fun opportunity for co-op.
Yeah. How do you feel the game is held up? It is an older game now. Do you find yourself going back, and is nostalgia keeping it alive for you, or are you noticing a few rough edges that maybe you hadn't paid attention to in the past?
I think Fallout 3 maybe has aged the worst. It is the oldest. And of course, Fallout 1 and 2 are like isometric action RPGs. So depending on who you ask, maybe they aged worse. But Fallout 3, I think something about the art style. And it was, I don't know, the mid-2000s were the era of brown, right? And so Fallout said, okay, well, we're going to do gray, like blue-gray. And it's like, okay, that's cool. It's different. But everything's like the same shade. There's very little color variety, and it feels like a wasteland, and they did really good there. But that's one thing I think Fallout 4 did much better, was just, it's a wasteland, but there's color. And there's a little more separation for that reason. You kind of get a better sense of where you're at and where you're going. Even Fallout New Vegas, they kind of went back to reddish brown. But I still feel like there was a little more vibrancy to the Mojave Wasteland as opposed to the Capital Wasteland. And so that's what I feel like Fallout 3 has stumbled on the most in its old age. The gunplay still feels really good. VATS is still fun. The writing is still clever and funny and well put together. Liam Neeson's performance as your father is still awesome. So yeah, the rest of it holds up. It's just I don't feel as invested in the Capital Wasteland as I do some of the other wastelands I've wandered through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's hard. It's kind of and I think I was thinking about what you're saying about the colors. It just seems like that was a consistent thing in that generation to kind of cover up the imperfections of the graphics at the time. But at the same, it's hard because I know there's a lot of games that we grew up with and we really loved, and at the time we just thought they were groundbreaking. But now as time has gone on, you go back and realize they're not as good only because newer things have come out. For me, that would be a game like Ocarina of Time, where at the time it was an absolutely groundbreaking game, but now it's like, oof, they've done some really good quality of life improvements on that series since then that it's hard to go back to the original, even though if it wasn't for that game paving the way, we wouldn't have what we have today. And I think Fallout 3 is kind of like that game, where at the time it was so groundbreaking and just insane and changed gaming. But now it's like, okay, but we've had other Fallouts and other open world games that come out now that, it sounds to me, at least from just listening to you, that it's definitely not quite, it'd probably be more fun maybe to play the newer games.
Maybe. But nonetheless, it's sort of like I guess it's more of a concern if you've never played Fallout and you're going to judge the entirety of what Fallout is by Fallout 3. Mm. You know, it's sort of like, well, maybe just start with Fallout 4. It's okay to start in the shallow end of the pool. Mm-hmm. If you like it, you like it, and Fallout 3 will be there. I would say the deep, deep, deep end of the pool is Fallout 1, because that's where you're playing a really rough around the edges, isometric action RPG, turn-based tactics, all that nonsense. But that actually brings up a really good point. So before I get to it, though, allow me to ask you, what have you been enjoying lately?
Well, I feel like this is kind of, how to put it, going in a very different direction tone-wise regarding what I've been enjoying lately. Fallout being a much more mature, I'll just, be flat out, it's violent and somewhat graphic. What I've been enjoying is a lot more tame, and it is a show that many people may have heard of called Bluey.
Of course.
Of course. Both of us being parents, we tend to follow a lot of what our kids watch, and Bluey has been a show that I've always joked is a show for parents that kids can also watch. Yeah. And recently, I say recently, it's been a couple weeks, but the last few episodes came out for this last season and have been something I've rewatched a few times now because I was quite taken aback by how well they laid out the story and the characters. For being a kid's show, I tell you what, it's amazing the emotions they can invoke. And yeah, I just kind of find myself weirdly going back to the last scene of The Sign, which is the big episode they just released, and just finding myself just continually pulled into that emotion. I get goosebumps every time the music kicks in. And I don't, and it's funny, so I don't remember if we talked about this on the last podcast. I don't think we did, but yeah, you and I were together when we watched that episode.
Yes, and we had our families together, all the kids, and we kind of made a barbecue of it and watched The Sign, because that was the big 30-minute long special. And that was awesome, and I'm glad we did that. And I would love to do it again when the inevitable Bluey movie comes out, because I think they set that up really well with the last episode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have some theories about that, but I don't think this is the podcast episode to discuss those theories. But
maybe not quite.
Not quite. But I do think that there's a lot of options of how they could go forward. It was just very, it was a fun moment to share with you and your family. It's a fun moment to share with my kids. And it was just a surprisingly thought-provoking episode that has stuck with me. And it's something that I will probably think about for a long time. So
some could say a timely episode.
Yes.
I know that, I myself, as clearly evidenced, I was on the other end of the episode. I was the shaggy-haired dogs buying the house. So, hopefully there wasn't any significant drama on the other side of that. But no, it's hard to move your family from where they are to somewhere else. And it doesn't matter if it's across town or across country. That is a big deal. And especially for young kids, it's difficult to understand what's happening and why. And I thought they captured that really well in the episode, like when Bingo's playing and her toys are slowly getting picked up by the movers as she's playing. And she just turns around and realizes that the whole room is empty all of a sudden and runs and tells her mom. I'm like, ooh, like that. Yeah, they just don't get it. But by the same token, they do understand more than you realize. And the younger they are, when you decide, hey, we have to move, the younger your kids are when you do that move, the easier it will be for them to then settle into their new life and put down roots. And pretty soon, like we've asked our kids a couple of times, hey, do you remember where we came from? And they'll tell us no. Or they'll be like, oh, yeah, I don't really, oh, do you remember the apartment we were in? Or do you remember that park? And they'll just go, no, I really don't. And it's the weirdest thing, because to us, it's only a couple of years past. But to them, it's literally a lifetime ago. Mm-hmm. And
you got to think about it in percentages. That's the thing that helped me understand it, because, like I always joke that for my my youngest, she's not super old yet, is like when something bad happens to her, it's like the worst moment of her entire life. And as hyperbolic and as silly as that sounds, it actually is, because for her, she's had less than 2 years to exist. And so those moments are huge. And same for even my other kids. When you have only so much of your life to, base reality on, these moments are they're huge. They don't have the perspective as you get older. I think that's why, to a certain extent, not in all aspects, life gets a little bit easier as you get older. Not like life itself is easier, but by having more perspective to look back on, you start to realize that some of the things you were worried about weren't as big of a deal as you thought they were. And you manage to see the new challenges in that same light, and you can you can essentially handle those better. Not perfect. And like I said, I still face things to this day that stress me out, but it's easier to look back and say, okay, we'll get through this. So, but yeah, for kids, that's harder.
Yeah.
And I think that show does for being a show that's cartoon dogs, it is one of the most grounded shows I think I've ever witnessed for kids. That is just kids doing normal kid stuff. Most kids shows always seem to be in some fantasy land or dealing with things that aren't, they have morals that they can relate to, but the things that they're experiencing are not relatable. And this is the first show that I feel like is just very relatable and teaches good messages. And and again, it also doesn't make parents want to rip their hair out. It's like there's humor in there that only parents will get. And there's teachable moments in there that are almost more for parents than they are even for kids. So great show.
Yeah.
Highly recommend. And like I said, I'll be thinking about that for a while. And speaking of great shows, sorry, do you have more to say? I don't want to transition too quick. If you have more to want to fill in on
that's
that.
fine. Like I had a point, and the point I was going to kind of bring up actually is not on the doc, but it's very relevant, at least to me right now. And I think you'll probably have a lot to share on it. But on the topic of Bluey, something that came up right toward the tail end of what you had just said, it's a show almost for adults that kids can watch in a weird sense. Or, obviously it is a kid's show. But think about other examples of quote-unquote kids shows that throw in, jokes and bits and pieces for the adults, right? They're usually characterized either by a strong sense of irony or by sort of a, like wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Hey, this is a naughty joke that's going to fly right over the heads of the kids, but the parents will get it and they'll laugh and they'll feel fulfilled for having done that. I love how Bluey doesn't succumb to that the way Bluey engages the adults is through authenticity and sincerity, as opposed to irony and sort of, well, we'll throw this, naughty little thing in there, just for you or whatever. It engages with adults by way of just being like, hey, this is what being a parent is like. And you've done this and they're dealing with it. And, one of the criticisms I've heard levied against it is like, well, Bandit and Chili are too good of parents. And it's almost like we've forgotten how in narrative characters often represent archetypes. And it's okay for them to be that archetype. Not everybody has to be a shade of gray. Not everybody has to be, imperfect. Like there's a time and a place for those stories. There's also a time and a place for just the archetypical hero. And in the case of Bluey, the archetypical parents. And they do such a good job at it that it's just, to me, a breath of fresh air to see a show that doesn't flinch and doesn't shy back from its message and just kind of has that intense sincerity that just really appealed to me.
Mm-hmm. I think that there is a hunger from people for authenticity. And I've noticed this. I was listening to a podcast just recently that was kind of making a point about this, because so a show like Bluey blowing up is a perfect example of this, but also the rise in popularity of podcasts is a perfect example of this, that there is a hunger for just conversations, real people talking about real things, not pretending, not, just talking about life. And I think we all feel this sense that we want to connect with things that are actually going on rather than things that are made up. And I'm saying this not to say I still highly value good stories. Some of my favorite stories are all based in fantasy and sci-fi and tell amazing stories with great morals. But I think that it hasn't been balanced properly with also good stories and good conversations and just things that are more grounded and real. And so I'm think this rise in popularity with Bluey and podcasts are actually weirdly interrelated, because people are hungry for just grounded media. And another thing mentioned in this podcast was that people always say, well, young people are shorter and shorter attention spans, which is why TikTok's doing well. And they said, and I'm going to, the podcast was actually with Conan O'Brien. It was between him and, oh gosh, I can't remember. He's a British comedian. I feel so bad, but he's really funny.
Ricky Gervais?
No. It's not Ricky Gervais. I'll have to think of him later. But anyway, the point, I want to make sure I give credit to them because I'm quoting them like crazy, is that it's true for junk. So for junk and just easy bite-sized stuff, attention spans are getting shorter and shorter. But at the same time, for quality content that's grounded and interesting for people, it's actually never been better for that kind of content, because people are watching long movies and if that was true, then why are people binge watching shows that they're investing hours upon hours into these long episodes and long storylines? That I don't think that our attention spans are actually getting worse. I think for certain types of content they are, and there's a place for that. But I think that at the same time, people are hungry for authentic content. And so I just thought I'd share that because I thought that was a very interesting tidbit, because as us making a podcast, part of mine said I like listening to them, but part of my motivation for making one is I just felt like it's a fun way to just share life and interests and things that are just genuinely going on in our lives with an audience. If nothing else, like I said earlier, just a way to, if nothing else, I'll look back on this in 10 years and I'll have an archive of it's almost like a journal, a shared journal. So,
and I feel like no matter what happens to the podcast, in your mind and in my mind, we're literally just talking to probably half a dozen very specific friends, because that's how it started. And I think that's how it will continue in perpetuity, because, and maybe there are others who are looking for that conversation, and that's awesome. And that's what we're here for. I think that there's times where I've sort of presumed that, the things that I feel and the priorities that I have and the, almost like the motives are kind of common to everyone. And that isn't necessarily the case. I think that there are some people who just don't have the desire to broadcast, whatever that means for them. Like for me, broadcasting is game development, and broadcasting is, hosting LAN parties like we've done in the past, or broadcasting is doing this podcast, sort of processing the world around me while simultaneously reflecting it. And, obviously the reflected light will be colored by it bouncing off of me. Some people just prefer to be receivers or processors or what have you, where they then are filtering all these different signals and kind of, enjoying the product, if you will. And that's okay. And one isn't, they need each other. The receivers need the broadcasters, just like a radio, in order for there to be any sort of communication or conveyance of ideas or content. And so, and to some degree, maybe everyone at different points in their lives is a receiver or is a broadcaster, but that requires people to be continually changing roles and whatnot. I have long, kind of felt like, hey, I hesitate to use the word compelled, but I just broadcast. It's just who I am. It's just what I do. Like, I'm the guy who uses, at work in Slack, actually using my statuses to like almost as microblogging, right? And I'm sure but like no one notices because no one expects it in that arena. And so I've, my close friends at work, I've told them sometimes, hey, if you actually want to know how I'm doing on a given day, I will tell you through my Slack status. But it's just, it sounds silly and maybe it is, but it's like, I broadcast. And this is a great way for us to broadcast together and to just, like you said, kind of engage,
Yeah. I think we all need some different way to have an outlet. And whether that's, and I think everybody broadcasts in a different way and to a different audience size as well. I think with this, the potential size of our audience is massive, but it currently is small. But like, I think of art in general is a form of broadcasting. Whether you share it with 1,000 people or one person, it is broadcasting something. My wife likes to paint. And so, but I'm really, unless you come to my house and you see them on the wall, you're not really going to ever see them. She doesn't put them online. She doesn't sell them. But that is her broadcasting something. And I think we all do that to some extent. And this for us is just a form of creative outlet. At least it is for me. I love not just the conversation. I love the whole process. I love the idea of continually improving and the editing and finding new ways to grow as a person. And whether that growth is on a technical level or on a personal level from these conversations or from the comments we get from people, I love that process. And so for me, this is a creative outlet and I'm enjoying it. But yeah, I think I just thinking back what you said with receiving as well. Like, I've been a receiver for so long. I think that's part of the reason I wanted to do this too. So I wanted to contribute something, to broadcast something. Whether my opinion matters or not, it doesn't matter. There's plenty of people with worse opinions being shared on the internet. So might as well throw my hat into the ring.
Yeah. Like, it's not even about the opinions either. Although I will say that, I guess early on we kind of wondered what's the Orange Team podcast going to be about. And I think we thought it'd be more about gaming and tech than it is. It really is kind of just us talking, but that's kind of what it was always going to be. And so that's fine. But sometimes like,
I think gaming and tech's a framework for it, but it's not it's not the meat and potatoes of it. It's the crock
and we're going to
pot.
get there even today. We've still got, gaming on deck. We just haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah, I almost transitioned us there, but I'm enjoying where we're at right now, I think. But yeah, go ahead.
You want to know something really fun?
Yeah.
I still haven't made the point that I had thought of so long ago. So if let me just get it out, and then we can deal with it. When it comes to creating your first draft, your first draft, first attempt, first episode, first whatever is gonna be garbage. And we've encountered that. Like, we recorded 4 before our first publicly aired episode of the podcast. And we thought we kind of had things ready by that point. And I know you mentioned this when you were visiting. It was like, if you go back and watch episode 1, it's like, oh my gosh, how much we've improved, even in just how we carry on the conversations and the different things. And I'm sure that at some day in the future, I'm going to look back at season 2, episode 2 and go, wow, I can't believe we're so much, in a better place, doing better now than we were then. But today, I got stuck in a YouTube spiral.
As one
and
does.
I ended up, as one does, far too often. And I ended up watching clips from the Bluey pilot. And that's what made me think of it, because I was like, oh, he's going to talk about Bluey. The Bluey pilot, I don't know if you've seen it, but it is rough. Even the editing, the dialogue, like the voice actors are there, but the way they edited the dialogue, it's like too frantic. It's almost like a Nickelodeon show where people are talking over each other and there's more shouting, and Like they just didn't, it didn't even sound like the voice actors themselves had bought the idea yet. And the art was rough. And even like thematically, that scene where Bandit is pushing Bluey on the swing, but then he just starts ignoring her and like looking at his phone and like pushing her. There was a part of me that went, that would have never happened. That would never happen in the Bluey show. Like Bandit is not that kind of a dad as portrayed through the entire show. But that was their first draft. That was them still finding the characters and figuring out what was important to them and what they wanted to emphasize and what morals they wanted to convey and or the moral of the story, And if we had not have had that pilot with Bandit playing Fruit Ninja and completely missing an opportunity to, connect with his daughter and push her on the swings, we would have never had the Bandit that we got in the show where he's engaged. And like even the moments where he is distracted, it's never presented quite so blasé or like, I don't know what, flippantly, I guess, as it was in that pilot. But that pilot that Joe Brum and his team at Ludo Studios created is what secured them the funding to create the rest of the show. So as I'm in the midst of a variety of creative processes, and, as we are, whether it's the podcast or otherwise, I know that I have a tendency to get locked up in my own mind and be like, I can't write another word of this, or I can't, do, like, I just don't know what the right answer is. I don't know how to take this creative endeavor forward the next step. And then you kind of panic and then you spiral and then you set it aside and you're like, I can't come back to it and write more or, create more or paint more, or whatever it is. When in reality, the first draft is always going to be bad. It's only when you come back around to it that the first draft is, as it's been said, you telling yourself the story. The second draft is where you actually shape the story to be told to someone else. And as a result, that should be so freeing and liberating. Go make your pilot with a wildly out of character Bandit because you don't even know who Bandit is yet. Go make your game with the, player progression system you think is going to hook your players and really work and drive, DLC or whatever. And you're going to realize, oh, that actually is super unimportant to the game. And the game mechanic, I thought I put so much time and effort into these sound events that the dinosaurs will respond to and they'll come over and investigate and things like that. It's like, it doesn't even really matter. Like, that's not the game. And I thought it would be so cool, and it's not. And that's okay. You've got to get those first drafts out so you can follow up with the subsequent drafts. And those are what are going to get published, ideally. Podcasting is a unique creative field because to a large degree, people are seeing our first draft. It's not like we write out the script for an episode and sit down and record it over and over and over until we get it right. It's like, this is what it is. And that's part of the appeal, that it is sort of raw and unfiltered and authentic. And obviously there, like I said, there's episodes we haven't aired, but once the cameras are on and everything's recording, it's like, this is it. Whatever happens now is the podcast. And I guess this was a massive monologue instead of a dialogue. So what are your thoughts on first drafts and the creative process?
Well, so something you said kind of resonated with me because I remember when at a previous company I worked for, a coworker of mine, Brooke, if you listen to this, shout out to you, said these words that always stuck with me: is perfection is the enemy of done. And I don't know if she probably got that from somewhere else. I don't know if she made that herself, but it always stuck with me because I am someone that wants everything to be perfect. I don't want to start it. I don't want to do it. I don't want to broadcast it or share it unless I feel very confident in the quality of it. And to a certain extent, the podcast is an example of that because, like you said, we had 4 episodes we just didn't publish because I wasn't feeling comfortable with the quality of what we were doing. But at the same time, we finally just said, all right, we're gonna put one out. And yeah, I do agree that there's an iterative nature that you have to be willing to accept in anything. Nothing happens perfect the first try. As much as we want to shortcut our way to the top, we want to make that great game or create that award-winning song or video or get millions of views or make all the money. Most of the people that I look up to, they didn't get there in the time that I have been doing what I'm doing. They've taken many, many more years and many, many failures and found themselves in way worse situations than I have been in. And yet they are super successful and everybody knows their name. So that helps me frame my world as like, okay, rather than just saying I need to hit, I can't do, I'll use an example. Like I want to make videos and skits, but I'm like, oh, I want to have the right camera equipment. I want to have the right audio, and I want to learn special effects, and I want to do this. And then I watch people on Instagram that do just the funniest, most entertaining stuff, and it's just a cell phone, and they just know how to point the camera in the right way, and they're very funny and naturally gifted. I mean,
and it's just somebody off camera throwing flour into the frame for an explosion.
Yeah, just silly things like that, and it's like, and you're entertained. And I realized, and then those people went on to go further and further. And now their production value has gotten better and better, and they're better filmmakers and better storytellers for that because they weren't afraid to start out, in that level. I remember when Vine was a thing, and there's people that were on Vine back in the day that are making really amazing content now. People who started on YouTube back in the early days are now making movies for Hollywood. But you think about how long YouTube's been around. That means it took them 15 to plus years before they got to get to that moment. They had to go through a lot of bad videos and mistakes and everything. So that's been something I use to help guide myself. And that's why we're doing the podcast, why we're doing it. And it's how I'm treating my business. It's how I'm treating some hobbies of mine. It's just incremental. There's a book I want to get that a friend of mine recommended called Atomic Habits. I wish I could quote the author, but I haven't bought the book yet. But he was telling me about it and how it's just about setting small, achievable goals and not overwhelming yourself. So even the smallest of victories is a step in the right direction. So for him, he's going to the gym, but rather than just destroying himself every time he goes to the gym and then burning himself out and not wanting to go, he's just like, just get to the gym and do something and then build the habit and build the habit. So eventually you'll just get better at those things and you'll do more. But it's that slow start versus this isn't a quarter-mile race. This is a marathon. We have to build momentum. It's like a freight train. It takes a lot of energy and a lot of time to get all that moving. But once it's moving, it's going. And that's how you have to kind of perceive life. And that's how I'm trying to frame my mind, because for so long I felt like I was a failure because I wasn't at a certain point in life, even though if I actually zoom out and look at things in the right perspective, I realize I'm actually exactly where I need to be. In fact, in some areas, I'm ahead of where certain people were at my age. So it's all perspective, and it's all, and that's what I enjoy about these conversations and engaging with other people, is it really helps you realize, oh, you're not alone and you're doing okay.
Yeah. They say no man is an island, right? But it's like, you really need friends, like a circle, because they're the ones who are going to celebrate with you and cry with you and fact check you and reality check you and just be like, hey, you are exactly where you need to be. And that's awesome. And sometimes that's what you need to hear. Yeah. Not much more to add, but
no, I think we've covered that. I think we're just gonna fully just embrace this non-segue into the next topic, because I'm actually really excited to talk about this topic, and I think you are more so too, just because I think you're actually a little more invested in this topic. But I do find this subject very interesting, so I'm actually not going to introduce it. I want you to introduce it because I think you can better explain what you want to convey.
Well, if you will, cast yourself back in your mind's eye to the ripe old year of 2007. A very young and impressionable Mitch was really excited for Halo 3. And coinciding with all of the hype around Halo, Microsoft started floating the idea of a Halo film at times, and especially around that era, I think in the year following. Peter Jackson was attached, and that Peter Jackson of Lord of the Rings fame. And if there's anything that can be said about the man, it is that he knows how to adapt material intended for one medium for another medium very, very authentically and well. And so, a no-name director like Neil Blomkamp comes up, and as we now know, Neil does sci-fi very, very well, District 9 and Elysium. The future looked bright, and I was already planning opening night. Like, we were getting our group together, and they hadn't even announced the movie. And it was like, okay, well, we're all going to go together, and we're going to have tickets for midnight, and maybe we'll see it multiple times at midnight. We were so hyped. That just like a bunch of grapes on the vine just shriveled and withered in the hot northwestern Washington sun, or wherever Microsoft is. And there isn't really much sun up there, so that analogy falls kind of flat. The fact is that it died. And throughout the years, they've come back to it over and over and over and over again until finally Steven Spielberg was attached, and they announced it as a television show. Specifically, a mini series or whatever you want to call it that was going to be on Paramount Plus. And I still didn't believe it until I saw it, because I've been burned so many times before. But here we are. The Halo show is now in season 2. I'm genuinely in shock at how badly they missed the mark. And I know that there's people who enjoy it. You always hear it said, well, they just didn't make that show for you, or, well, they were trying to pull in a new audience. Well, good job. You guys pulled in your new audience. It just so happens that audience didn't include people like me, and I don't think I'm a particularly special Halo fan. I mean, I've read a good number of like the books up through 2012 or something, like I haven't read a lot of the 343 books. I played every game multiple times. I could tell you the names of all the Spartans of Blue Team, from the books. And so when the Halo show came out, I was ready for some deviations from like the core canon. Like I was like, okay, it's the Silver Timeline. It's Silver Team now. You don't want to step on any feet. We're not going to touch Fred or Kelly or Linda or the other Spartans that Master Chief grew up with. That's fine. We might get to them later. You kind of hold them as a card in your back pocket to play in later seasons. I don't know that they're going to do that. And what they have done is not Halo. It's staggering in how much it's not. It's maybe a soap opera, maybe a melodrama. It's a bunch of different things. Master Chief isn't even Master Chief. I'm shocked. And there's a quote from the showrunner that sort of explains it, I think, where he says, we didn't look at the game. We didn't talk about the game. We talked about the characters in the world. So I never felt limited by it being a game. I remain unconvinced that he even talked about the characters in the world, just based on what I've seen, other than figuring out, oh, who can we put there? Yeah, put this character there, without any regard for whether they belonged there in that role doing that thing. And maybe they should have talked about the game a little more. And here's why. It's tough for me to talk about Halo because I'm very upset, and because I don't want to spoil anything. Because honestly, there might be people out there who want to see it. That's awesome. I don't want to spoil anything. By the end of season 2, I was just like, this isn't Halo. Like, it is so much not Halo based on some of the things that have happened that they've kind of shot themselves in the foot. The seasons that are now getting to Halo are not going to be able to be what they need to be because certain characters aren't there. Suffice it to say. So anyway, long story short, oof. But then the Fallout show comes out. Now, the Fallout show is not attempting to retell the story of any one of the games. Awesome. So new characters, new part of the wasteland, are familiar parts of the wasteland, but different times. I'll allow it, right? It is so good. Just a complete night and day 180 flip from what Halo was. Everything is on point. The set design, the cinematography, the use of sound effects from the game in the show in their appropriate contexts. The props are all like taken, like literally just constructed from models of the game. Things like the stim packs, things like the Vault Boy bobbleheads, things like the different weapons, the power armor, all of it. You can tell that this team, unlike the showrunner for Halo, they did look at the game. They did talk about the game, and they also talked about the characters in the world. And they found a corner and a time in Fallout's world that they could fill out with their own story and their own characters, and could do so in a way that was respectful to the existing lore and even the nuances of the game, which is so challenging. People often just throw their hands up and say, okay, in the game it works that way, but not in the TV show or the movie. The stim packs work exactly the same in the show, and it's not injured for it. Like, literally, someone could be dying, and you hit them with a stim pack, and in like 7 seconds, you can literally watch their health replenish, and then they get back up. And it's like, that's just the way it works. Like, it is somehow simultaneously playing by video game rules and still a very engaging, visceral show. So all of that being said, it's not just me who feels this way. If you go to Rotten Tomatoes, which I won't hold up as the gold standard of any sort of rating system, but I will say that at the very least, the critics and the audience side of Rotten Tomatoes are both in agreement. The Fallout show's great, and it's filled with Easter eggs and love and all of that. Fallout's not even the only adaptation recently that has succeeded. The Super Mario Brothers movie, while not perfect, was still great. The Five Nights at Freddy's movie, again, not perfect, still great. Coming from an era that you and I grew up in, where every attempt to make a video game movie, maybe with the exception of the Resident Evil movie, just was not good. And the Resident Evil movie was almost so bad it's good. The Doom movie, so bad it's good. I still watch the Doom. That's my guilty pleasure junk food movie from time to time, is the Doom movie with Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson. Awesome. However, maybe Hollywood's figuring out the formula. Maybe Halo represents one of the last missteps in a long line of Hollywood not understanding how to bring games to the small and large screen. So, Leighton, from your experience and your opinion, what does it take to make a good game adaptation in another medium? And why have they proven so difficult to make until now?
I think you actually technically already answered this question earlier in your conversation, and so I will use you as the answer. And that is, so let's just look at the most recent examples. The Halo show, Fallout show, Mario movie, Five Nights at Freddy's. Of those 4 I just listed, 3 of those did very well. And the common denominator of the 3 that did well was they worked with the original team of developers. Five Nights at Freddy's was, I believe, heavily worked on with the original creator. Please remember,
Scott Cawthon actually wrote it and produced it.
There you go, right? So, of course, it's going to do well by that. The Mario movie, Nintendo was very invested. Of course they are. They're very protective of the IP. But that movie was a love letter to Mario fans. So much love. And yes, it wasn't the deepest story, but it's a kid's movie, so don't read too much into that. But it was so thoughtfully designed and animated, and the story was perfect. The characters were great. I mean, as everyone was worried about the voices, and they did great. Like, they clearly put a lot of love and care to that. And then the Fallout show. I've watched interviews basically saying that, like, the lead actress played the Fallout games to prepare for being this role. Like, that's like some Henry Cavill levels of like commitment. Though I think he was just a fan of The Witcher anyway. Though unfortunately, I think The Witcher didn't
wasn't a fan of him.
Yeah, well, that's because he was a fan of it, but the people who developed the show, I don't think, followed through. So that's another example, though.
Yeah.
So, and then Fallout. So I think that is the winning formula, but Hollywood is not I don't know if Hollywood's necessarily figured it out as much as there's certain people that are handing over the IP without any thought. And then there's some people like, we'll let you make a movie, but we're going to be part of it. And that's what allows the IP to do well, because the people that know the story, know the characters, know the theme and the style and the vibe of these games is able to put their creative input. And that's, again, when you let people who have creative, like truly creatives get involved, then you're going to get a good product. When you let corporations get involved and it's just like, hey, look, here's the Halo IP. Do whatever you want, make a show out of it. We just want some money. And that's kind of what it feels like, because I don't know if you or I think you might have described it as like the Halo show feels like this, the husk of was like some parasite got in and basically took the body as a host, but it's not necessarily, it's not Halo, but it's like something is taking control of the body and is masquerading as it.
The Flood got into Master Chief's armor, and it's just reanimating the dead, desiccated body.
There you go. It's a perfect, example right there. So that's what happened. And I think, the perfect way for future adaptations to work. And actually, okay, I'm going to use a Mario movie again because there are 2 Mario movies. The one that we know recently,
aren't there ever?
Which that did really, really well. And then there's the original Mario movie, which I will have to do my research on this, but I don't know how involved Nintendo was with that adaptation. I think they were a little bit more hands-off, which is why they steered away from movies. And
they were so... However involved they tell you they were, like, they're trying to protect themselves.
I guess that's true. But you got to keep in mind, when the first Mario movie was made, Mario was very new. So Nintendo there was a lot of stuff that came out for Mario at that time because Nintendo wasn't as protective of their IP because it actually didn't have the same value as it does now. So like you look at early Mickey Mouse, they did a lot of weird stuff with Mickey Mouse, but now that he's the face of Disney, they are way more protective of how they use him. And Nintendo's the same way with Mario. They're very protective of how they use Mario because he's the face of Nintendo. And so you look at the early days, I mean, that movie came out... Oh gosh, when did that movie? I don't remember whether it was the 80s or 90s, but it was early days of Nintendo before Mario was really like, I don't even know if Mario had a voice actor yet. So, there was a lot more freedom. Mario, because it was around 96 is when Charles Martinet was first voiced him, which was when Super Mario 64 came out.
Was it the late 80s or early 90s that they had the Super Mario Brothers Super Show?
Oh, the Super Show was in the 90s, I believe.
But that would have been prior to Charles jumping on board, right?
Yeah. Well, let's see. So the original Mario movie, it's 93 is when the Super Mario Brothers movie came out, and the Mario...
So the original Mario movie, I can see the boardroom meeting, and I can see the guy holding the cigar, holding the glass of scotch, and I can hear him saying, Blade Runner, Total Recall, RoboCop, and an Italian plumber jumping on mushrooms, make it happen. And that's basically what came out, because it was this fever dream of dystopian sci-fi, gritty New York underworld, seedy underbelly. Speaking of just being shocked that something got made and published the way that it was, wow.
Yeah. So just to fill you in, so the Super Mario Brothers Super Show aired September 4th, 1989 through December 1st, 1989. So it only aired for a very short period of time. But yeah, it was 4 years before the actual live action movie came out. But again, Mario was released in 80, well, I think it might have been 84 in Japan, but 85 to the world. And so he's only 4 years old as a IP at the time when the show came out, and only 8 years old at the time that the movie came out. So again, he hadn't, even though he's really popular, because it was 3 years before he actually got the voice that we know from Super Mario 64. So,
right.
But back to the subject, right? Let's get real back into the subject of how to make a good adaptation. I think that's the key, though. I think that if you look at every adaptation, that seems to be the the sauce that makes it work. Now, I'm sure there's exceptions to the rule, but I think the companies that are genuinely concerned and invested in their IP will put in the effort to make sure that the movies do well, because again, good movie sales draws in more people to their gaming audience, and it just grows the brand. So yeah. I think that, I don't know if there's any more to it than that. I could be wrong. I mean, if you think there's more to it as far as what makes a good adaptation, if you want more than just who's involved, maybe there's a certain element of like perhaps it's like what they draw from the games, maybe, is what you were kind of thinking of.
Well, it's sort of like, you've heard that old adage where, okay, you can have things done cheap, you can have them done fast, and you can have them done well. Pick two, right? It feels like more often than not, perhaps due to Hollywood just seeing video games as the young, scrappy, upstart art medium on the block that hasn't earned respect yet, whenever Hollywood and other companies start talking about, hey, we're going to make a movie or a show about this, it seems like they pick fast and cheap because they just don't trust, they don't have faith in the material. And that's just going to come with time. Some of my favorite stories of the last 2 decades came out of games. I just feel like, the era is fast. Well, think about The Last of Us. That's not one of the games I was specifically referring to, but I think The Last of Us represents the first game that everyone looked at and said, okay, I think this is art now. I think you guys have graduated. We can talk about The Last of Us in the same breath as we could talk about The Walking Dead in terms of post-apocalyptic zombie fare, right? There's certain games coming out that have basically a movie difficulty where it gets rid of most of the combat and whatnot, and you can almost just experience the game as a series of cutscenes with a little bit of player interactivity in between. There were games also talking about The Walking Dead, Telltale's game, The Walking Dead game, that really was just a story that you periodically got to interact with, and it was a good story. And it's like we're starting to see games embrace what makes them work while also aspiring to do a better job of, there's the games that are just high score tables, and then there's the games that make you think and that you carry around with you maybe for the rest of your life. As is, maybe my case with Halo. I don't think that, I understand that the team behind Halo wanted to build the best game and tell the best story they could, but the part of Halo that sticks with me isn't actually the campaign, as cool as it is, and as much as I continue to talk about it and think about it, the stories about Halo that stuck with me most are the ones I did with people, the multiplayer side of it, And how could you translate, everything that Halo is into a show or a movie, when what Halo is so much of this ecosystem of Forge mode with the different maps people were making and LAN parties, and the campaign was great, and there's a cool story to be told there that could have been adapted and could have been adapted way, way, way better. It's, I am so. It's good to see the Super Mario Brothers movie succeed, Five Nights at Freddy's succeed, Fallout succeed, because in my mind that tells me, hey, the teams that are going to go out there and say, hey, this game was great, and we're going to take this game and just everything that makes it great, we're going to bring it to this other medium, that now they have some data points on the whiteboard to be able to say, hey, this worked. And the next game adaptation they're making, which who knows, might be, obviously another season of Fallout, might be whatever else we're playing right now. That they'll be able to say, hey, the adaptations that really work are the ones with teams that really care and are really passionately, deeply involved, fans of the game, recognize what they have, and aren't walking into the room saying, I'm going to tell my own story. You'll get what you get, Yeah.
This is going to sound really weird, but I'm actually going to bring this slightly back to Bluey again, because there is a common theme I see with these movies and Bluey and just the things that are doing well. Because there's a lot of media that, and I hear talks about this, and not everyone agrees with it, but there's definitely talks about how it just feels like so much of what we consume now is just degraded in quality. There's just not as good of movies or good as shows. But then recently we've been seeing things like the Fallout show and Bluey and just, I don't know, different mediums that are doing well. And it's when people are, again, it comes down to that creative freedom and lack of intervention from focus groups and corporate, shills that just want to just take certain points on a graph and say, make a show about this because it's trending. And that's what I see with Bluey. It's what I see with Fallout. It's what I see with all these. The common thread I'm seeing is just there's a love and a passion and even let's just go beyond just video game movies. So there's movies that have come out recently that maybe I haven't watched, but just from the reaction I've heard from other people is that it's made by people with low budgets, but a lot of passion and care for the content. And then they just absolutely explode. I'm trying to think of the name of the movie, but it was made by two YouTubers, Raka Raka. It was a horror film, and it did really well because they just made a really good movie. Everyone said it's one of the best horror films they'd watched. And I was like, that is awesome, because it's just two guys that put their heart and soul into this, and they weren't thinking about what's the best focus group thing. They're just like, this is interesting to us. We're going to make it. And then what it turns out is that there's a lot of people out there have been hungry for something that's not focus group tested, because these focus groups seem to just be like a sampling platter versus like, let's make content for specific niches versus a content that is designed generically for everybody.
Yeah. It comes back to what we talked about, that first draft and the creative process. When you have two YouTubers or just one guy in his house making something, it's going to be rough and it's going to be ugly and it's going to have sharp edges and it's going to be this gritty, tough to chew piece of content, but it's going to be real and it's going to be authentic and it's going to be something that, that's what you go, oh, I see you and I see what you had to say. And it'll be better next time. In the pursuit of the manufacturing line for art and creativity, they polish off everything that makes art human, and that makes it accessible, and that makes it, something worth grabbing hold of and studying from all angles and carrying around with you in your pocket, and that's the power of the rough draft, the power of, not that you release the rough draft, you're still going to iterate and it's still not going to be perfect the seventh time. But when you make your entire creative pipeline gated behind polishing and polishing and polishing and polishing hundreds of thousands of times before ever letting it see the public, it's going to end up a little bland.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's true, because you kind of like, you cook the flavor out of it. So yep. Sometimes you got to let things be a little bit more raw, a little more organic, a little more, if we got to use food analogies here, but you let things, stop using chemicals to try and solve all your problems and just allow things to be the way they are. And there might be some people that get upset by that media, but at the end of the day, they don't represent everybody. And we just, like I said, we need more content that is risk-taking and grounded, and people telling stories because they have stories to tell, not because they're trying to make $1 million or $1 billion. The goal of making these things, I know that's a hard thing to say, because at the end of the day, there's money invested, so obviously money needs to be made back. But I think the problem is that the media has gotten too big for itself, and so it's so grounded in making money, and that the art is lost. There is a balance to be made, but I do think we need to get back to art for the sake of art, and the money will happen. I think there's a hunger there, but you're not going to find that in focus groups, because what they're doing is it's okay. Here's a perfect example. AI. I'm going to be very short on this because I don't want to talk about AI too much, but AI is essentially just regurgitating stuff that other people have created in a new package. So it can't technically create anything original. It has to build things off of things that have already been written or things that have already been made artistically. The same is happening with these focus groups, is that they're just basing their opinions off things they already know, but artists come along and say, I've got something different. I've got a new perspective. I'm going to blend these two things, or I'm going to take a story that usually is in this genre and put it here. Or I don't know, just tell a good story versus, basically what we're getting is AI content. Without, even before we even used AI, I just feel like a lot of the content we're getting is just generic because it just feels like it's just building off of what's already been made versus saying, all right, we've done this. Now let's make something new. But we've gotten this system of this is safe. And so we're going to stick with safe. But I think, I was talking to my wife about this the other day. It's like the problem with like these big movies is they have budgets of like 300, 400, $500 million, sometimes, I know, crazy budgets, right? So they have to make that money back. So they have to play it safe. But I'm like, imagine if you took a $200 or $300 million budget and you split it across a $5 million movies. How many movies you could make and spread the risk around. And so if a couple movies flop, that's okay. But what if one of those movies can, a $5 million movie can make $500 million? Yeah. I mean, we've seen it with like certain, small films. I mean, actually, I think Deadpool, the original one, was like that. It was a very low budget for that movie, and it did phenomenal. Another movie that takes us way back is Napoleon Dynamite.
I was going to mention that.
Yeah. Talk about a low budget film that absolutely soared to success. And it's so good. And I still quote it to this day.
Still.
And
so good.
I think that's a perfect example of if rather than trying to make giant blockbusters, and maybe you do one, if each studio did one major blockbuster a year, I'd still be happy with that amount of content because there's still plenty of studios out there. But then instead spread the love across a bunch of new creators, new up and coming people that you can take risks on now. And sometimes that's how you create new IPs. That's how you create new stories. And maybe you do create new series that can stem from those, but you're never going to create new content unless you let people take risks. So I think that's kind of where I think things need to go, but I don't think that's where it's going to go unless again, Hollywood follows the money. So unless they see a trend in that direction of low budget earning more money, they're not going to pursue that. They're going to keep saying, well, Marvel made this much movie, Star Wars made this much movie, Avatar, and like all these other movies that made billions of dollars. So anywho,
it's not about the Benjamins.
It's
about making a difference.
It's about making a difference. And I think I think people at our level, that's where we think, because we're not thinking, we weren't just handed a $5 million budget to make a podcast. We're literally shoestringing our way through this. And I don't think I'd want to be handed $5 million to make a podcast or a movie. I would rather make things using the limitations I have, because I think that would actually make it a stronger story.
And then, you got to start by doing more with less. To earn the right to have more, kind of,
Yeah, and I think I wouldn't want to jump straight into that, and that's not the point. It wasn't about me and whether I would do anything. I just think that it's like the whole struggling artist stereotype. But and not that I want people to suffer and struggle, but I also think that a certain amount of adversity creates stronger art. I think because you appreciate what you've created at the end, but also you learn more that way versus having everything handed to you easy. It's like, okay, but now the refining almost happens through the struggle, and it's like more organic, natural refining versus a committee refining. So anyway,
the refinement and the improvement comes from almost trying to impress yourself. Like, writing a story or making a game or whatever, you're going to sit there and be like, this just isn't right yet. Like it's especially if you're honest with yourself, if it's about the process, you're going to sit back and go, it's not there. I need to put it back in the oven. And then bit by bit, it'll get as good as you can make it individually. And then that's when you involve other people to review your work and provide their feedback.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so as we continue on, we're gonna keep refining the podcast, refining the games we work on, the media we create. We've got so many new ideas. I've got loads of things I want to do, but it's gonna happen slowly because we're busy people and a lot going on in life. It's I'm learning just from this week alone that I have to be careful to pace myself because I want to say yes to everything. So I gotta pick a couple things and just stick with it. But it's okay. Just iterate. I don't need to have it done this year. I don't have to have it done immediately.
Yes.
I can, but I think just by
2020.
Yeah,
I was gonna say 2025, the year of themed dreams.
there you go. This is just the beginning. We're starting out here with our podcast, and again, as we start season 2, it's just fun to get back into this. It's been fun to think about the future. It's good to dream, always good to dream, but also like just make sure that you don't. I don't know how to put it other than what I've already said. Just don't let the dream consume you.
And that's funny. Yeah.
Don't
be like Napoleon Dynamite that made $46.1 million on a $400,000 budget.
That's insane.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. That's a 115 time return.
Yep. So, well, I think that about does it for this episode. Thank you, everybody who has stuck through to the end. We appreciate you listening or watching. If you like this, please give us a like or follow or subscribe or whatever platform you're consuming our content on. We really appreciate it. Is any feedback you'd like to give us, leave a comment or go onto our social media. We're on Facebook and reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you guys. And as always, Mitch, this has been great. Appreciate you. Any last words?
Appreciate you, brother. Go watch Napoleon Dynamite if you haven't in a while. It's still just as good. Or bad, depending on if you liked it or didn't like it back when it came out.
I agree with. I think you know what. Even if you don't like it, it's still worth seeing. Just for the experience. I think whether you like a piece of media or not, it's sometimes good just to experience it. You see how it makes you feel. Alrighty.
Yep. And we'll see you right back here next week with another episode.
Right. Well, I'm Leighton. He's Mitch. This is the Orange Team Podcast. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.